Welcome to the final webinar of the 7th year of the Nutritionist webinars. I'm Marianne Fessenden, Educational and Academic Liaison for AMTS and your host for this series. This year we are focusing solely on emissions with an emphasis on dairy cattle. We have covered topics from using byproducts, proper accounting for emissions, sustainable fats, methane mitigators, and even using social media to share facts. Today, we're joined by Dr. Tom Tylutki, CEO of AMTS. In today's webinar, we've asked Tom to provide a plan that nutritionists can implement to help reduce emissions and address the growing furor outside the industry about animal agriculture and the climate. He does that and some other things. Please enjoy the webinar, followed by the question sessions.
I want to say that this was one of the hardest webinars that I actually had to put together because it really touches on some subjects that are difficult for me to calmly address. We asked, since this is the last webinar of the year for AMTS, of this special series that we did on emissions and methane and such, we asked everyone to give recommendations or give suggestions of what everyone wanted me to talk about for this one, and they could really be lumped into 5 or 6 different categories. One of them being methane reduction products. Another one, which is a very, very critical component in this whole discussion about methane emissions, is, let's say that we had carbon trading going and people were getting paid for trading carbon credits, and then we find out that the products that we were told were reducing methane emissions actually do not. Would we have to pay, would the farms have to reimburse the investment from those carbon credits? That was a very, very timely question, very interesting question. And then had quite a few on how do we reduce protein or nutrition feeding? How do we, so that we can think about emissions related to that. We had some people, had one person ask about what we were going to do as AMTS related to NASEM 2021. And there were some other topics that people threw out. So I'm going to go through, we're going to talk a little bit about methane. I'm not going to get too deep into it because that to me is the one I'm trying to control some of my emotions on. And I also think that Frank has done, if you go back and look at Frank's webinar, he's addressed a lot of these issues related to agriculture and methane emissions in a very, very professional and very correct manner. And we need to do more discussions like Frank did. And I'm only going to say a couple things about NASEM. That's really simple for MTS. We're doing the same approach. We've taken the same approach with NASEM as the official CNCPS has done. Van Amberg and I talked about it right when we heard NASEM was going to be published. And what we've done is we've added the mineral and vitamin calculations for requirements and the new biological values that were assigned to all the minerals by the committee for NASEM 2021. We added those. We didn't replace what we had. We still have the NRC 2001 for dairy, the 96 updated, 2006, I think, requirements for beef. But we just added the 2021 so that people could evaluate 2021 numbers and 2001 numbers side by side, because there's some pretty big differences. And then there's some unanswered questions that we have related to 2021's edition, including things as on some of the trace minerals, organic minerals versus inorganic sources. That there's no differences in biological values or digestibilities between sources. So, as we think about some of the suppliers, some of the commercial products, we've already gone and have been asking them, what do you want to do? What numbers? Because it causes some challenges for us. And we're also showing on lactating dairy cows the predicted intakes based on either the updated animal equation or the animal fiber equations that Mike Allen put together. We're showing those for lactating cows. Again, in addition to what we have is the old CNCPS equation, as well as the NRC 2001 equation. There's some interesting things as I've done some evaluations of and just a broad spectrum of diets that the 2021 animal only and then adding on top of that the animal and fiber equation. There's some interesting things to be looking at that. At this point, we're not going to do anything else with NASEM. It's especially since CNCPS version 7 is in process and well in process to a point where I'm hoping, to be fully implemented and released to the public, to our users. The way things are looking, it'll be sometime 2023, maybe second half, maybe the end of 2023. It may be a great Christmas present for the industry for 2023. We shall see. So the whole issue with methane, wow, like I said at the beginning, this is a difficult topic for me. I've got very strong feelings about this. When we look at the diet that we feed, the majority of the ingredients that we use are either byproducts from human food or from fuel production. You think of all the distillers' grains or even soybean meal or canola meal. Those are all byproducts, really. Or we use a lot of byproducts that are human food and edible. They don't meet human food standards, or they're returns from human food production. For example, I use a chocolate candy cookie blend, or think of all the wheat mids or wheat shorts or wheat bran that we feed around the world. We do a lot of byproducts, and we're using other things like forages, where we could get a really high yield of a crop that is good for ruminants, but would be marginal in terms of yield for direct human food production. So it allows us, ruminants allow us to capitalize on raw materials and resources that otherwise would either be wasted or would be not possible to use. So, as we think about the carbon that's released by ruminants as methane, it's really recycled through plants. It's recycled either through direct feeding of these byproducts, or it's recycled through the growth of new plants. When we grow a grass forage or an alfalfa or corn silage. And that recycling, I call it, there's no clear term on this. I call it old carbon because it's carbon that's already CO2 that's already in the atmosphere, and we're recycling it versus new direct carbon emissions from the utilization of fossil fuels. And I think we need to make that distinction. I think that distinction needs to be made at a regulatory level as well as on an accounting basis, because we're being challenged to address this, and I don't know how much we can really address it. Products, there's a lot of research going on different products about methane mitigation around the world. As of today, and this is October 9th, 2022, we don't have any approved in the USA yet. I know TSM's product, the 3-knot product, is going through that process. And so I'm not going to say anything about any of the products because there's still a lot of R&D going on, and we see all these numbers and all these claims about what kind of methane reduction we'll see with them and everything. But I do want to throw a couple numbers out at you. Let's put this into perspective. There's all this excitement about some of these seaweed products or algae products or any of these. Okay, let's say that we have a 50 gram per day feeding rate, which is low or average maybe for some of these products. I looked it up earlier. There's about 94 million head of cattle in the USA. So that's between beef and dairy. Includes calves, everything. I didn't look up, sheep, goats, or anything. I just looked at cattle in the US. So at 50 grams today, that's 4,700 metric tons of product that we would need to feed per day to treat the entire US cattle herd. How are we going to produce this from some of these products? How are we going to produce? I don't even know. Is it a 30-day growth cycle for some of these products? Is it a 7-day growth cycle? How are we going to generate that kind of volume to do this just for the US? Now let's include Europe. Let's include Asia. Let's include India. This is not something that just a handful of little products is going to treat. We've really got to put this in perspective of what is physically, logistically possible. But I think we also need some trials that last 3 years at a minimum, I would suggest. I think some of them we really need to consider 5 years trial to really see if this reduction in methane emissions is consistent and if it remains. I did some looking through the literature to try and look at what are some of the long-term trials. And I was just using 3NOP because that's actually got the largest data set out there that I could find. And it's, a lot of the trials, they consider long-term 120, 150 days. And here's one that 2021, it was published. And it's about, looking at 3NOP, varying concentrate rates. Okay, great. And one of their stated objectives, the present study aimed to address missing long-term studies investigating the effects of 3NOP in combination with varying forage percentage rates on emissions. Okay, their stated objective, long-term. Well, the trial lasted from day 28 prepartum to day 120 postpartum. So 148-day trial, okay? That's not long-term, sorry, folks. And if we look at the data from the trial, this is just, I screen captured this right out of the paper. This is methane emissions up here in the top right, top left panel, okay? The two blue lines are the non-3NOP treated animals. The red lines are 3NOP. It's either high forage or low forage, I think, rates, higher low forage diets. And yes, there's this really nice reduction in methane emissions all in through here. But look at this one, the lower feeding rate. By week 7 in lactation, those cows, that effect is starting to go away. A higher feeding rate, okay, it lasts a little bit longer, but look out here, we're getting towards the end and we're starting to see that trend upwards in methane emissions. We even look at methane yield, grams per kilo of intake. We see it's even more pronounced where this low level, they come back pretty quick. And the higher level, they're starting to trend back up, okay? Even methane intensity, okay, per kilo of energy corrected milk, we're seeing the same trends. So, this really, and it really goes back to the one question that I was asked to address was what happens, if people were using this and selling carbon credits, and then this newer data came out, after a 2 lactation long trial, where we actually saw that it goes away, where the treatment effect goes away. I don't know the answer to this. Okay, I think it's a huge lack of data that we have to really be able to answer some of these questions. And when you look at the age of methanogens, okay, recent work, 33 genera representing 13 families and 6 orders, and ancient lifestyle, okay? Remember this, these are not young bugs. These are bugs that have been around for one of the estimates I saw was like 3.2 or 3.5 billion years. And everything looks like so far that, they evolved only once, and that all modern methanogens share a single ancestor. These things are survivors. They live in tough environments. And are we really arrogant in thinking that we can control a species that's evolved over a few billion years? And that we can do that in 10 years, 15 years, 25 years? Or is it going to evolve quickly for survival of it as a species? I personally think that's what would happen. I really, think about antibiotic resistance in drugs, in microbes related to animal health, human health. The species is going to do anything it can to survive. There will be individual bacteria, methanogens that will learn to cope with lower levels of hydrogen substrate to grow. Would they switch their metabolism to capture something else, or to do anything to be able to survive? So instead of thinking about how are we going to treat the rumen to minimize methane emissions, should we really be focusing on how do we minimize methane per kilo of human edible proteins? That whole efficiency factor of emissivity, or however the hell you say it, and really think about it differently, and do things scientifically based that we know that can really improve the sustainability of our ag businesses. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything, that we should just give up and be like, we can't do anything about methane, move on. But we do have to recognize that cows are ruminants. We're the ultimate recyclers. We convert all these wastes to human edible proteins. But what I am saying is I am highly frustrated by our industry. I'm highly frustrated by the hypocrites and that promote policy or promote various sides of what agriculture should do when they have a vested interest in other components. A great example, let's take we're going to say, okay, agriculture, you can't use GMOs, but yet we will openly support growing meat and from cell cultures that's based on cloning. Come on, let's talk about this. Or taking, this is a huge thing in the state of New York right now, where they're taking really good tillable land and converting it to solar farms. But yet the support for farms to do methane digesters for RNG or electrical production is really low. Heard it was said by one of our politicians that, oh my God, if we were to support methane digesters for RNG, then that would just cause an explosion in the number of dairy farms in New York State. So people have no clue, and yet they're the ones setting policies on us. So we need, as an industry, we need good, strong, local, regional, country, global voices that are telling a consistent story to tell the power of what we've done in agriculture, of what we've done in ruminant nutrition, to really promote our success story and to prevent bad policy decisions. I don't think I think we still have an opportunity to prevent some bad policies, but we have to act now. We can't be waiting anymore. And I'm afraid when I listen to some of the things going on around the world related to some of these policies discussions or some of the research, we're doing what we've always done in production agriculture. Great example. Every time that we've had an increase in labor costs or environmental policy, as dairy farmers or as beef farmers, what have we always done? Quite simply, we bitched and moaned and complained, and expanded, added more cows, and sucked it up, and adapted and survived. Um, mean that it leads to more consolidation in the industry, but we survived every time we've done that. It's not so simple to do that anymore, especially with things like methane or increased regulations that a lot of the areas around the world, farms can't expand in size anymore. There's no more land, or our milk buyers are saying with the dairy industry, we don't want more milk. So we really can't do business as usual of just expand. We need to be thinking differently before we are completely told what to do. Okay, enough of all that. The other topic that people wanted to talk about, how do we reduce protein? So I'm going to switch gears here. We can get into a lot of discussions on the methane side and everything that I just talked about. Like I said, very passionate about this and very frustrated, but we'll talk nutrition now. So can we do lower protein diets and get good milk production? And the answer to that is absolutely we can. I think this is a classic study to me anymore. You know, it's 2006, it's 16-year-old data. And it was great because what did they do? They increased the diet crude protein, okay, in these lactating diets. And look what happened to milk nitrogen. There's no difference. Nitrogen intake went up just like it should, but manure nitrogen went up, okay? And we look at that manure nitrogen, fecal nitrogen really didn't change. It's all urinary nitrogen. So we know, you know, what I want you to start thinking about is, in general, when we look at diets around the world, we tend to overfeed rumen degradable protein. Okay, we are a lot of the models that are out there are recommending levels of RDP that really are not needed by the animal, so we end up wasting a lot of nitrogen. You know, here's just some great data as well from 2005 out of Jim Clark's lab. Look at this range in diet crude protein, all the way from 12 to 26%. Yeah, like, you know, let's take this 16% range. Okay, look at the range in milk production at one level of crude protein. That's plus or minus 10 kilos of milk. Right. So crude protein, forget about it. We don't, you know, we're going to talk MP. We're going to talk about how do we actually better formulate these diets to bring these diets down to where we're more nitrogen efficient. Just some more data on this out of either when Norm St. Pierre was still at Ohio State or out of Hisroff's lab. You know, increase the nitrogen feeding, okay, increase crude protein levels. And in general, there's very little change in fecal nitrogen, but any excess nitrogen that we feed or an imbalance of amino acids where we can't use it efficiently, we see this increase in urinary nitrogen. And that increase in urinary nitrogen also takes us to varying levels of MUNs, PUNs, pick your number that you want to evaluate. The higher those numbers, the higher the level of wasted nitrogen going into the cow. So when we look at the nitrogen going through the cow, and notice I'm saying more nitrogen because it's what we're really thinking about when we think about rumen dynamics and rumen requirements. The rumen doesn't require protein. The rumen bugs require nitrogen and amino acids. So anything that comes into the cow that she consumes, either as proteins or as ammonia, it's going to get degraded. You know, those true proteins are going to get degraded into peptides and free amino acids. Some of that will go into ammonia. And those pools will get used to produce, to help in the production of microbial protein. Any of the ammonia that's left over, it's going to go into the blood, and it's going to go through the liver and could come back through the plasma. It's going to be mitigated by the kidney as to how much nitrogen, how much urea she's holding within her system to recycle back into the rumen. And that's a really important point to remember, is the cow is her nitrogen dynamics to maintain rumen health and rumen function is amazing. This is, again, we're talking about a system that has co-evolved. It's a symbiotic relationship between the rumen and the ruminant animal that has developed over millions of years uh, for her to be able to utilize these poor quality feeds in general, and keep that rumen healthy to actually feed the animal. It's we can look at some different methods of processing some of these proteins, or is there differences in preservation methods of forages, or how much is actually recycled by the cow? And I think that's a really important area to discuss, is what type of recycling do we have. This is a study that came out of Oulay's lab, where it wasn't a lot of cows, but these are intensive studies, and it was really looking at 3 different forages. So either sun-cured hay, silage, hay crop silage that was either formic acid treated or inoculated. Okay, so basically these 2 silages were the same, and then the hay just ended up being a little bit lower in protein because of normal harvest practices and like that. So intake nitrogen, okay, the hay was a little bit lower nitrogen level in it to begin with. And when we look at how much urea was generated, you look at that, about half, over 50 to 60% of the nitrogen that was consumed ended up going into urea. All right, remember that number. When we look at how much of that urea nitrogen was coming back into the GIT, back into the gastrointestinal tract, 30 to 45% of that nitrogen was coming back into the system. Okay, again, it's just this nitrogen recycling is massive in the cow, and she's very, very efficient in doing so. If we start pulling together all the data, 50 to 70% of the nitrogen that she consumes gets converted to urea. Okay, and this appears to be, a required functionality of the cow, which makes perfect sense to keep that rumen healthy. And about 60% of that urea production actually goes back into the gut. Okay, it's going to go back into the rumen, either directly across the rumen wall or through saliva. And all the data is showing that 30 to 80% of the total microbial yield. Okay, so all the microbial nitrogen that we get is coming from recycled nitrogen. Some of that's because of protozoa predation. Some of that is just because of just recycling through the rest of the system. But they rely heavily on this. And when we think about how we've modeled this, and there's different models out there. If we look at Dijkstra's model out of the Netherlands, or we look at Molly out of Cal Davis, there's different levels of complexities of how to do this. The base Cornell model, right now, we deal with 2 pools of bugs. That's changing with version 7, which adds a 3rd pool that adds protozoa. And that has some really cool functionality in it. But let's just talk about the base system now. We deal with the bugs that ferment NFC, and bugs that utilize fermental structural carbohydrates, so potentially digestible NDF. And those 2 pools of bugs have different nitrogen requirements. The bugs that do NFC are kind of lazy. They prefer to use some free amino acids and small peptides to meet their nitrogen requirements, but they can use ammonia. The fiber bugs can only use ammonia. And that's one of the things where the Cornell model approach has really helped us on reducing nitrogen levels in diets, is taking into account these nitrogen requirements of the bugs, and finding that we can reduce RDP levels quite a bit. Now, the interesting thing is the fiber bugs, while they don't require amino acids per se, they can't produce their own branched chain amino acids. So we've got to have either some free amino acids of the branched chains or peptides with those in it, or the branched chain VFAs to meet their requirements for growth for those amino acids. So we've still got to have a little bit of true protein in there. We can't just feed all urea to these cows. Or we're hearing there's more and more, there's some work going on and some products coming on supplying branched chain VFAs to try and meet the requirements of these animals, of these bugs. Okay. At the end of the day, we can account for how much nitrogen the rumen needs and be much more efficient in how much we're actually feeding the cow in terms of total grams of nitrogen. Chris Reynolds put some of this data together with nitrogen recycling and looking at how much is recycled or that proportion that's coming back into the gut versus how much is being excreted in urine. This is some really classic data to me now. We look at it's related to dietary crude protein, and you can see that as protein level goes up, the amount of nitrogen recycling comes down. Okay, again, she's going to do everything she can to keep the rumen happy. We get down into these low levels, 7.5%, 5%, not greater than 90% of the nitrogen that's coming into the rumen is recycled. The inverse is true too, that if she doesn't need it, she's going to excrete it via the urine. All right. Now, when we put those two graphs together, so the blue line is the nitrogen that's coming back into the rumen, into the GIT, and the X's are urinary nitrogen excretion. Okay. You notice here at about 15% dietary crude protein, about half of the nitrogen that's going into the rumen is recycled, and half of it's being excreted. We can get all the way down here, and this is, some of the work that come out of Cornell and like that, being in the 13, 14% crude protein levels on diets. Okay, so about here, we're still seeing, 40% or so of that nitrogen is being excreted through urinary means. So that's really showing us that we have a lot of opportunity to improve our efficiencies of nitrogen utilization. She's really adept at maintaining her nitrogen balances. And we really just need to think about how are we going to capture that nitrogen more, and how are we going to improve the efficiency of our overall nitrogen utilization. They also looked at is there benefits of timing releases of nitrogen and carbohydrates. And in that study, looking at non-steady state feeding, they couldn't identify any benefit of trying to synchronize this whole concept of synchronization. Now it could be that they just didn't have a wide enough range on some things. We don't know, but in general, we overfeed nitrogen. Okay, it is really that level of simplicity. The next bunch of slides, and some of these are now 7-10 years old. Larry Chase shared these with me a while ago from a field study that he did, which so these are real diets, real herds. They put together a group from 14 herds, okay, of diets that were less than 16% protein. Most of the herds were over 80 pounds of milk. 4 states and a half a dozen nutritionists or so from around the area. Average milk, 85 pounds, range, okay, herd level, group level, 60 to 116 pounds of milk. Look at this range in protein, 14 through to 16.5. MUNs 8 to 14, okay? Average was 9.5. And we're going to talk some more about this MNE. So that this is milk nitrogen efficiency. It's kind of considered that it looks like that the maximum possible efficiency is around 40%, maybe 42. Okay, And look, we've got groups in here doing that did 38% efficiency. The average of 34, and look at the low 28. Here's some huge opportunities. So think of it this way: this is grams of milk nitrogen divided by grams of nitrogen intake. Okay, so it's a gross efficiency number. These diets, 48 to 60% forage. I know I've seen some diets more recently going up into the low 70s on forage level with pretty high levels of milk. So the industry has been evolving quite a bit in the last 10 years since Larry put this data together. Pretty good range on milk fat, milk true proteins. But look at this start, 24 to 32. And we'll come back and talk about that one a little bit, as well as the range in sugar, 3 to 7. None of them are really high fat. Okay, so that should tell you something right away of what the direction we're going. I'll say this right now: it's all about how are we going to maximize the amount of fermentable carbohydrates going into the cow. That's the key. That's the trick. Some of the diets. Okay, this was 140 cows, tie stall herd, TMR 92 pounds of milk on 14% protein, folks. 31% NDF, 29% starch, 5% sugar, 4% fat. Nothing real special. Okay, 60% forage diet, heavy corn silage. Okay, 17 pounds dry matter, a good grass alfalfa mix haylage. All first cut. I know this farm, they do all their first cut that they harvest is for the lactating cows. 13 pounds of corn, a little bit of molasses, some sugar, soy, roasted beans, a little bit of animal protein in here, and amino acids. Simple diets, okay? And you'll see that as we go through a few more examples like this. They are simple diets centered around high quality forages. Across the study, the data set that Larry had, if we look at peaks, we've heard this, you can't feed low crude protein because you're going to have clip peaks. That's not true at all. There's no difference in peak milk by lactation in this data set. Again, it's intake driven. Data out of California, okay, 2010, looking at ration crude protein versus milk production of the herd. There's absolutely no relationship, okay? So it's some more examples, okay? 54 pounds of intake, 92 pounds of milk, 14.4 crude protein. Well, they're 31.6 NDF, and amino acid formulated. Okay, again, corn silage, grass haylage. Okay, decent, again, forages. Look at another 53 pounds, averaging 89, 15% protein, 31.5 NDF on formulated, pretty tight, 94 and 98 for energy and protein level milk. Low, just 104% of requirement on rumen ammonia. You see RDPs in here and like that. I don't talk about RDPs other than I'll say this. Compared to the numbers that you're used to looking at probably on a lot of your herd, a lot of your diets, a lot of people are going to say these are low. And I'm going to sit here and tell you there's no static number for an RDP in the model. It's calculated. Okay, there is, when someone says the diet should be 10% RDP, I'm going to come back and say at what level of intake, what level of milk, what level of everything, because RDP is dynamic. It is based on, it's calculated on the ingredients that we deal with, the pool sizes, the rates, but also based on level of intake, what are our passage rates. That's why I never talk RDP. I'll look at rumen ammonias. And again, 104 is formulating these diets pretty damn tight, folks. Again, heavy corn silage, 9.8 pounds of alfalfa hay, had a little bit of straw. But look, a blend of both flaked corn, so this would be like a 28-pound steamed flaked corn, and a finely ground cornmeal. and you look, there's no animal proteins in. Oh yeah, there is a little bit of animal protein in here. Sorry, but again, heavy fermentable carbohydrates, a good source of bypass proteins, and then formulated for amino acids. Another herd, 50 pounds of intake, 15.8 protein, 84 pounds milk. Again, formulated from amino acids, low fat. Okay, it's not like we're feeding these things like pigs. We're actually feeding them like good, healthy ruminants. Haylage, okay, canola meal, ground corn, corn silage, citrus pulp, roasted beans. Amino acids, okay. Ingredient selection, ingredient source control, good forages. That's why we see this call it 6.8 lysine percent of MP, methionine 2.3, lysine 2.94. This is the old numbers. This is from like 6.1 biology. That's how old this data is, folks. Okay. Now, if we were to look at these really need to be rerun. This data set needs to be rerun to look at it in terms of methionine to ME ratio. And because this is a little bit out of line of what we're currently recommending for lyse to methionine. We're in version 6.5 biology. We're more like 2.65 is kind of the optimum lyse to met ratio. Here's okay. Remember that MNE that was in the earlier side. That's what this is: productive N over total N, 35%. Again, remember 40% seems to be about the biological max, maybe 42. Another number that Van Amberg really likes to talk this number: productive N over urinary N, because it's urinary N's where we can have the most impact. We're not going to change fecal nitrogen much, but we can change urinary nitrogen. And he's targeting, greater than 1.1. This example, it's 1.3 to 1. So that's really saying that we're utilizing that nitrogen efficiently versus what we're releasing through the urine, which is also important because that urinary nitrogen is what's volatile and much more likely to escape into the environment and cause water quality concerns. This is real herd. I'm not going to tell you herd names, nothing, but we'll show you this as to what impact tightening down that RDP feeding level, really focusing on the fermentable carbs, and then focusing on amino acids, what impact it can have. Okay, you can see this herd. This is milk true protein. There's a little bit of seasonal variation. Okay, but I'll say here at this point, some forage changes. Okay, that's why we saw milk fat come down like this, and then they really bumped up the amino acid formulations. Okay, they went from like I think it was like a 2.3 to a 2.45 methionine as a percent of MP, if I remember the data right. In that reformulation, when they did that, they also saw like this with MUNs, averaging 12, 13, some spikes up around 14, but then when they went in with the higher amino acids, step 1, dropped them to 11, step 2, dropped them to around 7 or 8. So they figured out, they calculated out that it came out that they reduced nitrogen in urine about 60 grams of nitrogen per cow per day. That may not sound like a big number, but when we blow that up on 1,100 cows, okay, that's about 26.5 tons of nitrogen that we pulled out of the environment per year. That's a big number. If we put that back on a soybean meal equivalent, okay, that works out in 2009, that was 40 cents a cow per day, lower feed cost. We're talking real money on being able to do this over and above anything that we do from an environmental standpoint. That's the beauty of going down this path of reducing crude protein levels. Typically, we're also saving some money because we're removing protein feeds that we really don't need to be feeding to these cows. Another herd, high group, okay, 1,000 cow herd. 100 days of milk, 60 pounds of intake, 15.8, 60% forage, 120 pounds of milk, average for that group. Milk to feed, almost 2 to 1. Pretty damn impressive. Zoom in on some more, 30.9, about 31% NDF, 29% starch, 5% sugar, 5% fat, 60% forage. Okay. Again, forage quality. That productive nitrogen to N intake, remember I said 40 seems to be the biological max that we think about. This group's doing 38%. That's phenomenal. That is really efficient utilization of nitrogen on these cows. A lot of herds are going to be, you start looking across a lot of herds, are going to be 25, 26%. There's huge opportunities. And when we looked at productive end to urinary end, this group is 133. Most farms, most groups, 0.6 and 0.8 to 1. Okay, so we are actually excreting more nitrogen in the urine versus what we're actually using to convert to animal protein, which is what we really are trying to do is convert nitrogen to human edible proteins. All right, so how do we do all this? Well, first, you got to define your animals, right? Okay, I don't care what formulation system you use. Define your animal, understand your client that you're trying to feed. Secondly, I want you to think like a microbial nutritionist. Okay, but that's really what we are. First and foremost, we're microbial nutritionists. We're trying to get as much out of that rumen as we possibly can, and then we supplement the animal. Okay, so how do we really do that? Well, we want to maximize microbial yield. So that is, we got to have a good, healthy rumen to be able to do that. And then what we use to supplement. Why push the bugs? Why push the rumen so hard? Look at the amino acid composition of milk. Okay, milk's green, tissue, so body tissue is blue. And the bugs, the microbial population's in gray. All right. Again, that showing that symbiotic relationship, that coevolution, that evolution of the rumen microbial population and the ruminant animal to actually be able to survive and reproduce. So we want maximum rumen output. So rumen microbial yield is directly related to how good our carbohydrate fermentability is. So we want something that's highly fermentable, not overly filling. Okay, we got to have enough fill to keep the rumen function going, and we don't want to invoke acidosis. And then we just make sure we have enough ammonia, have some branched chains in there to keep the fiber bugs happy, and then give a little nice spike to the NFC bugs by having some free amino acids in there. Pretty damn simple. Doesn't take a lot of extra rumen degradable nitrogen to really be able to get this system to function at its most efficient level. Where we have a problem though is really identifying and really understanding our sources of fermentable carbohydrates. And that's why there's been so much work on fiber digestibility as an example. We look at the microbial yield out of a high cow diet. About half of the bugs are coming from NFC sources, and half the microbial proteins coming from fiber digestibility. So that's why there's been so much focus there. We need the same level of focus on rumen-degraded starch. And instead of just thinking about, I'm going to feed ground corn, or I'm going to feed, X source of starch, really take a step back. And this is where the microbial nutritionist comes in and thinks about, what's the rumen degraded starch? What's the potentially rumen digestible starch? And we can come up with some different answers and different values on pricing some ingredients if we compare, for example, different processing levels of corn or different processing levels of barley or wheat compared to corn. Be thinking about pricing these ingredients on a per kilo or per ton of rumen digestible starch, because that's really what we're trying to stuff down the animal's throat is fermentable carbs. So let's price things that way. Let's evaluate decisions. Let's make decisions based that way. And it really, we can manipulate starch processing, starch digestibility a lot by processing and really enhance microbial yield. Think of ground corn or ground wheat as a protein source to the cow because of all the bugs that we grow. And a lot of times, yeah, grinding is the cheapest way to process some of these, but is it really the best way? Could we spend a couple extra bucks a ton and really improve our starch digestibility 15%, 20%? I don't know. And we really need to have good SOPs to evaluate this starch processing, regardless of what we do. Are we doing routine particle size on ground corns, for example, or are we double checking these with our suppliers to ensure that we're getting consistent grind size, mean particle size, and such? It's something that really is a struggle to keep up with, but it can pay really big dividends in how we formulate to maximize rumen output. All right. So again, we're trying to stuff as much fermentable carbs as possible down that animal's throat and keep that rumen healthy. And rumination collars really help us to push that limit a little bit further. But we also know that with some of the work out of Minor on the PE UNDF 240 work that they've done, or the particle size and overall NDF digestibility, there's some opportunities to manipulate our diets to really change some of the fermentability, some of the intake patterns. And we need to be thinking about how to take advantage of that, especially in light of trying to reduce nitrogen levels. And then again, like I said, think about our sources differently. This is just a table that I generated using the model on different ingredients. And so this is on an MP basis. And you'll see that there's MP from feed, there's MP from bacteria, and so total MP. So if we look at, for example, soybean meal, so this is soy 48, grams per kilo of dry matter, there's 227 grams of MP directly from that feed. And yet it's still growing some bugs, about 37 grams of MP per kilo from microbial production. So our total MP for soybean meal, and this is just one example. These are not static numbers because it depends on level of intake, passage rate, yada, 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 but 264 grams. Well, then let's come down here and look at like ground corn or ground wheat or ground barley. Okay, we've only got about 40, 50 grams of MP coming from the feed. Look how much we're getting from the bacteria. Okay, so suddenly we take this ground wheat example, 143 grams of MP. That puts it right up there as the same MP levels as something like sunflower or even approaching canola. But we're dealing with something that's low in protein, but it's fermentable starch. So we're growing these bugs. And then we look at the amino acid content, again, because of the bugs, fermentable starches are going to give us better amino acid ratios than if we were dealing with something like cottonseed meal, which is really low in methionine and lysine. So it really, again, grow bugs. Just ran an example. Again, these prices are old, like 4 or 5 years old. Okay, but conceptually it's the same thing where we start taking into account differences in fermentability and different qualities of proteins. Soy-based diet versus replacing that soy with a canola and a bypass, or canola and distillers, or a blend of those, or going from cornmeal to flake corn, or we just let it have all those sources and tell us which is the best mix of those ingredients. And you look, the soy-based, 7 pounds of cornmeal, and this might even be kilos, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I think it is kilos. Okay, so it's real simple diet: 8 kilos of corn silage dry matter, 5 kilos of alfalfa hay, 7 kilos of cornmeal, 3 kilos of soy. Well, it kept a little bit of the ground corn in there, 900 grams, but look at how much more. Look at it used 5.4 kilos of flake corn. Okay, higher fermentability, grow more bugs. It used a lot less hay. Okay, 9 kilos of corn silage would have dropped the hay down and brought in some distillers as well. Well, let's look at the performance. So MEMP level milks across all of them. You see there's a range. It's soy base 35, 34 MEMP. Replacing it from canola and a bypass, where we get basically 35 and 35. And it was a little bit cheaper. We come all the way across here, and where we let it, optimize across that. We got our about the same price and a little bit more on income over feed costs because we brought up our first limiting, which is a little bit. So we got a little bit more potential income out of this. Look at the diet crude protein cell. Okay, our soy base, we were 16.4, replacing the going to canola and bypass soy, we dropped it to 16.1. Those look bad. Forcing in, distillers to get similar levels of milk, our protein goes up to almost 18. Doing the canola, distillers, and a bypass soy, over 18%. Look at this when we optimize it though, 15.2. Okay, so same level of performance at a full point lower than what we started from, and a 3-point difference in diet crude protein, same level of performance, right? So this is what really is kind of possible for us to do. So we could also look at, and there's different forage qualities, different forage species to work with, other feeds, formulating it fully from amino acids. Okay, those are all possibilities. There is no one size fits all answers to how do we reduce diet crude protein, other than we want good fermentable carbs. Starts with forage quality. Okay, then we're picking what's the most economical MP sources. Typically that's more fermentable carbs, more feed more starch or soluble fiber or anything like that, and then supplementing the cow with the correct bypass protein, if we want to say that, to give us that level of MP, and supplementing it for amino acids. But it can all fall apart. Okay, we really, if as we go down these paths of being more environmentally friendly diets, if we call it that, okay, we've got to work with our feeders. We've got to work with our farms. We've got to make sure feeding management's good. What's being formulated, sure, we can control that. But what's being mixed and delivered on farm? How accurate is the feeder? How frequently are they feeding? Cleanliness of the feed. Look, there's a picture of a cow sucking on a piece of twine. And, I took that picture. So, that this isn't made up. We all know it. We've all seen it. Are we consistent in delivering TMR to the groups? Is there a consistent push-up schedule? And is the farm actually doing that? Is it good, stable forage quality? This is little thermal camera. Look at this, 29 degrees, nice, cool silage in that area. But then look at this, 41 degrees, so secondary fermentation. All these things will turn around and cause us to fail to be when we're trying to have more environmentally positive diets. Case management, just a great example. We'll see if anyone in Argentina notices who's in that picture. He sort of left that there on purpose. But then there's, on-farm stuff, mixing. Now, when I play this, you'll probably hear some Spanish being spoken in the background. This was a mixture in Argentina. Okay, I don't remember the farm it was on, but I remember we were walking by the feed bunks and I saw all this long hay sitting in this, and we've got this great mixture that does all this. That's not being mixed, okay? So there's equipment things that we need to think about. Should we consider, in that case, is it the maintenance of the mixer? Is it the maintenance of the knives? Or is it the brand of mixer? Or is it the loading order? Whatever. These are the things we need to really address. Great thing to have for feeders. I don't care what farm size is. Let's have a checklist. that ensures those SOPs are being followed, and we're getting good consistency in our feeding programs. Making sure the scales are working correctly on any of our equipment. All these things that we talk about for maximizing feed efficiency, if you want to use that, or being good feeders or whatever, becomes even more important as we move further, because the reality is we're removing a lot of the slack, a lot of the safety factor that's in our diets, and that's really expensive to overfeed. We've got to have the management to make things work. So with that, all of this is very possible, very doable with good data, good forage analysis, accurate formulations, and the care and consistency provided to us by the farms. With that, folks, we will be live shortly to do questions and answer. Yeah, I know, I'm in kind of a weird mood. Long story. We'll talk Thursday. Later. Bye.
Firstly, I want to thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, today's slides will be available as a PDF document for download from our website. That page will have links to the recording and the PDF presentation. I do convert the audio to podcasts. You can find those under our podcast tab on the website or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. Before I thank my co-host and sponsors, I'm going to offer a tease for next season's webinars, and I'm really pleased to say that some of the speakers came together yesterday to follow up on our focus on emissions this past year. We are shifting to the management of heat stress. In light of the increasing frequency of record-breaking heat events, we want to examine both the effects and mitigating strategies of managing high temperatures. We have begun contacting speakers, and I've already lined up a good list. And then we're going to throw in a topic off heat stress with the presentation from Odiram Escobar, a nutritionist in Chile with experience feeding very large robot milked herds. This is a topic we've had requested over the years. So, in addition to my wonderful AMTS colleagues, Lynn Gilbert and our speaker today, Tom Tylutki, I am joined by Dr. Martin Traxler, our distributor in Mexico and Colombia, and the director of AgriLab and La Tech, Elena Bonfante of Dairy Innovations Italia, who is our distributor in Italy, Hungary, and Spain, Sean Lee, our distributor of AMTS in China and the director of Insci Tech, and Marcelo Hens Ramos of 3R Labs, who is one of our first distributors who came on board, and he is our distributor in Brazil. In the afternoon webinar, we were joined by Hudayka Vustaran of Zerv and our distributor in Turkey, and our hard-working Argentinian co-host Paula Torillo and her staff of excellent translators providing an in-time Spanish translation. We want to thank them for joining us. They will ask questions from their country's point of view. And lastly, let me thank my wonderful sponsors from this year. They allow us to pay the speakers, although we don't pay Tom anything, and help justify my time commitment to this project. We thank our gold sponsors, Arm & Hammer Animal and Food Production, #ScienceHearted, the Canola Council of Canada. Learn more about feeding canola at canolamazing.com. Adina, experts in animal nutrition with expertise in plant bioactives, and Proteca, transforming the future of farm animal health. Our silver sponsors are the Forage Analyses Labs of Dairyland Laboratories and Dairy One, both with affiliates around the world, Adiseo Ruminant Nutrition Solutions to ensure animal performance, and Nova Meal from Novita Nutrition. Our bronze sponsors are AminoMax, Virtus Nutrition, Origination Inc., Balchem, and Glucobest. Each of these companies support education and research worldwide, and we hope that you consider them in your formulation decisions. I always like to open it up to my co-hosts in case they have to leave. And since Elena is at the end of her day, I offer to her to go first.
Wait.
Hi, Elena.
Wait. Yes.
Go.
Let me just say a couple things, folks. I don't want anyone to have the perception that I was throwing any researcher or any product or like that under the bus, saying that it's it's all good science, and that's what we really need to focus on with all of this, especially with things like methane. We need to focus on science. We need to focus on good science and ask and answer the correct questions. I just get afraid that we may look for something that's a quick silver bullet. And damn it, we all know in science and in biology, there's no such thing as a silver bullet. So let's be responsible in what we do, because we are messing with people's livelihoods on things like this. That's all I wanted to say. Now you can have it. Now you can go, Elena.
Thank you, Tom. Very kind of you. So, no, I think it was a great presentation and a good overview, actually. So my question is related, both to nitrogen side and starch side. So you know that here in Italy, for example, there are productions that may not use, urea, for example, to increase soluble nitrogen when it's needed. Is that a detriment? Is that going to be detrimental, in some conditions, or which is the way to overcome this?
You say that about not using urea, Elena, and actually, like in the Parma areas where they can't use silages, comes into play with that as well. Because when we look at the natural sources of rumen ammonia, we're really talking two potential sources. Good old fashioned RDP by itself. And then when we look at the amount of ammonia that can come into these diets that are silage based, it's substantial. So it does potentially give a little bit of a challenge, but it's really pretty easy to overcome, and that's just by using some excess of either solvent soybean meal or solvent sun, not rumen bypass veg sources, because we're still going to get, well, if we take regular old soybean meal, we're still going to be, depending on the level of production, 60 to 70% degradable, and all of that, the vast majority of that will end up going to ammonia within the rumen. So we can easily meet those rumen nitrogen requirements without silages, without the addition of urea. We may have to overfeed a little bit of non-bypass veg sources, but it is what it is to meet the animal's requirements.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And for the starch, so digestibility, 7 hour. Now I'm basing, my analysis on NIR. Okay, so is the NIR number now, something we can rely on? There is something more to work on, or the wet chemistry is still the best?
I'm probably going to say that 7 hour is plus or minus 25%, maybe greater than that. Definitely gives us good directionality. Is it something that's perfect? No. And that's a known issue, and I actually am super excited that Van Amberg has a grad student starting that is going to work on the starch side. So I'm hopeful that we can have something much improved in the next 3 to 5 years. Today, I use that 7 hour in normal formulation all the time. And I think it's strong enough for us to make some decisions on, but we have to be cognizant that there is variation around it. I think that the bigger issue is the whole idea of the right now, the KD and the intestinal digestibility of that starch are disconnected. So it's really, and we know from the data that starch that is not ruminally digestible also has a lower intestinal digestibility. So we need to spend more time talking about that and making those adjustments to tie it back into what the cow is actually doing with it. In severe cases where we think we may have problems that just aren't adding up with the model, probably be a good idea to do fecal starches. And then we can sort of back calculate some of those values just to get us closer. At the end of the day, it's still use the data that you have and watch the cows, because the cows will tell us how far off we are on things.
Thank you much, Tom. And we'll see you soon.
Be prepared.
Elena, thank you this morning for joining and for your comments. I'm going to move now to Marty Traxler. I have one question that I will ask, but let's go and see if Marty has any questions or comments from Tom's presentation.
I don't really have any specific questions, but just to see if Tom's temperature rises a little bit. This week, or in the past couple of weeks, I guess it's this week mostly, there's been New Zealand with the burp tax, and I saw you got a list of in-press documents from the Journal of Dairy Science, and there's a couple on dairy cows and their contribution to greenhouse gases. And I was just wondering, I haven't had a chance to read them yet, but I found it interesting that they came out almost at the same time as this New Zealand issue. Does Tom have any comments on that?
First of all, I'm going to thank you, Marty, because I was going to ask him that. I sent him a warning yesterday. So.
I did not see that in-press article, Marty. So that'll be an interesting one to go through, and hopefully it shows that the numbers that FAO and other groups internationally have been using are too high from what's really going on with cattle. When I saw that about I saw that news article about the burp and fart tax that New Zealand wants to impose, and that's actually their second time that they're proposing it. The first time it was just a fart tax, and they got beat up by everyone, and they pulled it before it went anywhere. It's an interesting problem, because even like with these products, one of the issues that I have with it is you go through all these products that are in various stages of development or approval processes, and none of them show an increase in performance, or maybe a little bit of a trend in changing body condition. So it comes back to who's going to pay for it? Because if we're expected to do this, and if we expect farms just to absorb this cost, and some of these are not cheap, it's going to drive further consolidation in the industry. We're seeing that every day. Is it paid for by the milk processor, who then passes that cost directly on to the consumer, or are we regulated to do something? And what we know from other things environmentally, for example, nitrogen excretion, I look at things like in the New York City watershed or the Skinny Atlas Lake watershed. Both of those are in New York State, folks. And just in case you didn't know, New York City water supply is unfiltered surface water. And they initiated a program over probably 25 years ago now, at least 25, on working with farms and doing 100% cost sharing to implement changes to control nutrients. Someone's got to pay for it at the end of the day, and we either that or we end up regulated. Okay, and I think that's where with New Zealand, that's probably some of where this is coming from, where they tried to get the industry to step up and do some things, and make some changes, and the industry wasn't able to make progress or didn't address it in a way that regulators thought it was working. So the next easiest thing is do a regulation and force it. And at the end of the day, it's going to reduce animal numbers. Let's try and avoid that happening in other countries around the world. Hell, look at what's going on in the last several months in the Netherlands when they announced a 30% reduction in animal numbers. This is the path that's being taken because we are not stepping up and being extremely vocal and as a global industry to tell our side of the story and work with the consumer groups, work with the retailers, work with the regulators to come up with feasible solutions and getting them to understand the biology of the ruminant animal, that hey, this is normal recycling. Carbon, we're critical part of the carbon cycle. If we don't do it, we're gonna get taxed. It's a sucky way to do it, but it's an easy way to force change.
So, Tom, I come back to the presentations we've had this last year between Frank and Jude and Sarah Place, and even stuff that, oh my golly, our speaker in August, my brain just stopped.
Yeah. Anyway, go on.
Anyway, just that the issues with methane emissions aren't coming from North America. They're not coming from the areas where we're using these more intense. It's the dilution solution. The more production actually decreases the methane. It's how do we help that?
Well, that gets really tricky, Marianne, and I've thought about that too, because when we start messing with ruminant animals globally, especially when we get into some of the developing countries, and we'll even include India on this, and even parts of China, Vietnam. We are talking directly about, it's not just the productivity level the way that we normally think. There's also the ways that families increase wealth.
Mhm.
And in a lot of countries around the world, increasing wealth is related to owning animals. So it's a global societal problem that is extremely difficult to address. And they also know, and everyone knows that if we go to the Europeans and the North Americans, as well as some other countries, where we have well-developed, fully developed dairy industries, and we can say some about the same with beef, that we've always been responsive to making changes, and we're the easy ones to regulate. We don't have a lot of numbers. There's not a lot of us. This is the thing to remember, folks. There's not a lot of us in this industry, and it's easier to control a small percentage of the population than it is to try and get change in other sectors of society. So we just have to be more vocal.
Okay. I'm going to hit one more panelist up, Sean Lee, and then we'll move to a few of the questions that we have. Unless Lynn wants to talk, but Lynn hates talking.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Sean.
Hi, Maria. Hi. Good morning. It's excellent presentation. Every time I learn a lot. Thank you. Well, don't want to complain too much, but you spend quite a lot of time to talk about this politics and public opinion management. It's difficult. But to come to China, actually, dairy industry is not. It's still government support. People want more milk, and large dairy farms for sure have a better time as smaller dairy farmers are suffering. But overall, the environmental policies are, well, I have to admit, it makes more sense than what we have here in Canada or New Zealand, though. So, like, we are going crazy. Many people don't believe this. So, well, China maybe more actually come to environmental policies and for agriculture, they're more rational and follow the common sense. And they're building a lot of solar panels and windmills. That's for sure. It's amazing. But overall, they have very rational agriculture policy, and I'm happy to see that. And
Well, Sean, let me jump in there for a second. They have a very rational ag environmental policy because they still rely a lot on food imports. It's, if you notice where we run into a lot of these more regulations in a more regulatory environment are in countries and societies where we have excess food and food's cheap.
yeah,
And we rely on exports. So it's there's a lot at play here, and hell, this country's never really seen severe widespread hunger unless we go back to the Depression. So when you have a well-fed society over generations that's used to cheap food, the demands go up on the production level, especially as we've had more and more consolidation, more and more people being 2, 3, 4 generations now away from having family that was in production agriculture. And I think that's some of the same trend that we've seen in Europe over the last 20 years is as younger generations are coming into and having a say and having more vocal beliefs, and they're a further generation away from the lack of food during World War II or having family members that are directly involved with agriculture. So we're facing a lot of challenges of how to get our story out and have positive impacts on the regulatory side, on the overall approaches to environmental issues. We're a minority. We're a very small minority, actually. And all of these things, it's just like getting into animal welfare issues. So many people get into it, turns into an emotional topic, and you start throwing science or facts at them, and suddenly you're dismissed as being in the pockets of big agrochemical companies. And so there's a credibility issue there as well to overcome. It's a shit show is what it is. And it's not getting any easier for us.
Yeah, but after all, I think we here in Canada or US or New Zealand, the system is very efficient. So the per kilo, per unit of good food, the environment cost is lowest. So if we can produce more, actually overall, if you put a global perspective, actually is better for the environment. But people here, we put the extremist to making policy and mandate that it's crazy and stupid.
Yes, yes, it is.
I'm gonna move us back to nutrition
Yeah.
Okay,
questions.
okay.
All right.
Okay, second, I have one more. Since CPS
Okay.
is very exciting. I can't wait to see that. But hopefully you guys can work harder and faster. But maybe sometime next year. But I really can't wait. Yeah, starch side analysis, just like Tom said, in IR, it's 25 percent give and take. It's hard, but recently we are doing some portable IR and other analyses. I think it's useful. It's good. Anyway, no questions for you.
All right, cool.
Okay.
Thanks, Sean. I'm gonna tackle some of the questions we have. This one, Tom, you answered, but you didn't really explain, and I'll get it.
I did that on purpose.
But it moved it off the open questions.
Yeah, I know.
There we go. So how is NH3 as a percent of requirement calculated? Is it really a requirement, for example, or for i.e. 1/3 of an NSC nitrogen requirement because 100% of SC nitrogen requirement, or simply a total nitrogen balance given excess nitrogen is assumed at the end in the NH3 pool?
All right, Jim, I wish it was that simple. And it's actually not, because from the fiber bugs, it is 100% of their nitrogen requirements as calculated based on the potential microbial yield from potentially digestible NDF. They're the easy ones. The tricky one comes with the NFC bugs, because and this is actually an error that we had found in CPM when we were developing version 6 of the model. In CPM, there was a disconnect where the NFC bugs had a requirement for peptides, and then it was just assuming 1/3 of their requirement, or 1/3 of their requirements had to be from ammonia. And when the peptides were deficient, it was not shifting that nitrogen requirement over to ammonia. And that's where it's tricky with the NFC bugs, because they will, per the model, all of Jim Russell's work, the NFC bugs will get a growth enhancement of up to, I want to say it's up to 16% in the presence of free amino acids and peptides. However, that is not an obligate requirement. If the rumen is low in free amino acids and peptides, they will shift their nitrogen requirements over to ammonia. So it's calculating their requirements. We take into account first what's the peptides available in the rumen, and then meet everything else beyond that supply side limitation, potentially with ammonia. So they could be anywhere from 1/3 of their nitrogen requirement from ammonia to, meeting 80% of their nitrogen requirements from ammonia. So they are the more dynamic pool in those requirement calculations. And then on the supply side, just so everyone's knows, the supply side for ammonia is coming from several sources. One is rumen degraded proteins, rumen supplied ammonia, and recycled nitrogen through the entire system. And so it's actually that requirement is pretty variable. Again, driven primarily by how much carbohydrates were actually degraded, and then adjusted for free amino acid and peptide availability, and then the balance of everything is ammonia.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Next question. Hello, Tom. Thanks for a great presentation. Is there any amylase enzymes with good consistency to improve coarse starch particles when grain silages are poorly processed due to late rains and where the farmer cannot harvest properly? The main focus is to improve rumen bacterial mass, but the question is, are there products to improve degradation of these coarse particles coming from the bunker of poorly processed starch? I see a lot of manure on different farms where maize particles can be seen in high proportion. We tried to use different products to decrease starch percent in the manure, but the response is inconsistent.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there may be some proprietary products that I'm unaware of. Generally speaking, though, no, there is nothing, and actually using amylases is wrong, because remember these starch structures, here we go, are encapsulated in proteins. Okay, if we take maize, okay, so the starch is encapsulated basically by the zane proteins, which are prolamines, which are resistant to enzymes, mammalian enzymes typically, and are soluble in acid over time, or soluble in ethanol. That's why we see this increase in digestibility over time in silage. And so really what we would need, and there has been a little bit of work done on this. Lyman Kung did a trial, I forget how many years ago now, where they did a mix of different proteases as well as some amylases, and they were showing some really nice responses in starch availability. I don't think any of those products that they did those trials on have been commercialized, but that's really the direction that we need to take, is an enzyme blend that includes proteases that are specific with maize for the zane proteins. We could talk about the same thing with sorghum. That's even a higher level of prolamine. I don't remember the specific name of the sorghum proteins. And so, yeah, there's potential there. The problem, I think, with some of those, we start getting into proteases, the cost starts to go up pretty quick. So I would love to see more work on that, because I think there's a lot of potential there.
Okay. So Tom, when you were discussing comparing the different fermentabilities of carbohydrates, would and this is sort of to people who are using our program, would the feed pricing analysis tool be a good use for looking at those?
Absolutely. I love showing that through there.
You're welcome if you want to share your screen and demonstrate it.
It would take me a while
tonight.
Yeah, we could possibly do that tonight.
Yeah, I think set something up during the day and maybe do that tonight, and then it'll be on the recording for anybody who won't see it. So
maybe we'll see.
Maybe, yeah. We're talking so much about low protein diets, and if I remember Larry's work correctly, those were on actual farms with real life diets, and the farms doing them were being profitable and continuing on. The new NASEM information has quite higher recommendations for protein. What sort of...
Oh man, you're going to throw me under the bus like that, are you?
I don't mean to. Lynn said I could ask it. I looked at it, and I don't. It just I wondered.
There are many issues, and some of the issues go back to the 2001 NRC, part of it is relying upon in situ, and there's lots of problems with the in situ methodology when we're looking at rumen nitrogen demands and overall nitrogen flow through the cow. It is just it's not environmentally friendly to use NASEM from a nitrogen based standpoint. I'll leave it at that.
I think you said that very diplomatically. Good
I
job.
tried.
You did so well.
I
You did so
know.
well.
Sometimes I can be a big boy.
Good for you. Let's see. And when Paula cautions that when you get to sharing your screen, just go slowly.
Super fast.
Yeah, super fast.
Super
Please go super
fast.
fast because she loves that when you do that.
I know.
Next question I had, and these examples you gave were definitely based on and this has been emphasized, and it sort of goes back to letting a cow be a cow, high quality forages. What is your recommendation when it's not possible to have those high quality forages? What would you
But it is possible to work with poor quality forages, and still have high levels of nitrogen efficiency. Again, it comes back to what byproducts are we using when we are forced to use things like a lot of gluten feed, be it wet or dry. Then our nitrogen efficiency is going to be lower. Brew can work really well, but then again, it's how do we supplement with good fermentable carbohydrates, be it ground wheat, ground barley, ground corn, or other processing methods for any of those to soak up as much of that rumen available nitrogen as possible.
Perfect. Thank you. How are you doing on your loading?
Well, when I look at my efficiencies, they are as bad as I thought they would. They're actually worse than I thought they would be. I'm looking at a heifer diet right now for, let's see, these would be late pregnant heifers, and my productive N over total N is 0.15, which is not surprising. If I go to a heifer that is, let's say, average of 4 months, 3 months, and that number is 0.33 to 1.
Is better?
It's that, well, yeah, growing animals are going to be less nitrogen efficient just because they're retained. We look at average daily gain as a percentage of productive use versus maintenance use is really low. So they're never going to be as good as lactating cows.
But if you go back to some of the research that's been done on growing animals that have been fed really well and how more productive they were as cattle, is that something that can be looked at to
Well, we can do
ameliorate that?
Yeah, but if we include all the beef cattle in the world, they're not as nitrogen efficient. They're not as nitrogen friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Lactating cows, just because of especially high producing cows, with all the nitrogen that's leaving the farm in terms of milk,
Right.
are phenomenal. And
Right.
close up dry cows, yeah, I'm in that 0.14 to 1 or so. Yeah, so it's pretty similar. Non lactating animals are going to be a lot less efficient.
Oh, right. Dang.
Oh, wait,
Sorry
no,
if that
I'm
was
sorry.
a loud noise.
That was the total N. That was the total N. I'm sorry. Productive N to urinary N, yeah, on a dry cow is 0.26 to 1, and on a late bred heifer, now that I'm looking at the right line, 0.33.
Yeah.
So that doesn't surprise me at all.
Hudai, do you have? Are you going to show us anything, Tom, or are you going to keep rolling?
I'm not going to show you anything on this discussion because it's just a report that would be.
Okay, good. Hudai, do you want to ask another question, or shall I give Paula a turn?
Yeah, maybe I have one other one. You know, the flaxseeds, I'm paying some attention to the feeding the dairy cows, especially in the early lactation with the flaxseed. So there's some, I think there's cyanide in flaxseed. Does this affect the cows and some bad effect on the cows? Do you have an idea about this one?
I do not, Hudai. Again, it would come back to the levels and dilutions to solution. I mean, there's a lot of flax that's fed in parts of the US and Canada. And boy, I'm trying to think of some of the levels I've seen because they've been blends for manipulating milk fatty acids. And I want to say, well, even the calcium salts of flax oil, that flax blend, I want to say I've seen as high as they'd be getting well over a kilo of flax meal. So no, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
Tom, is flax meal one of the products they would use to try to increase the omega-3 fatty acids?
Yes.
Yeah.
And because when Sarah was in Wisconsin working for Purina, I know that one of the things they did, they had some cheeses that they were trying to do high omega-3 cheeses. And so they were bringing in a lot of flaxseed, and it definitely made the cheese texture odd.
Sure.
That's interesting.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Maria.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, I just had a few words about this flax seeds. The different flax seeds, you need to be a bit more careful. You cannot just directly add unprocessed flax seeds. I think you need on the market. There are some products like extruded or dried, extruded or mixed with something else. But overall, you need to make sure this product, the fat is still highly unsaturated. So if it is not processed properly, it hurts the rumen bugs. The amount you use, usually it's processed. If it's processed well, you can go to 700 gram or a kilo. It again depends on how much flaxseed oil in that product. If it's pure flaxseed, apparently the 40% flaxseed oil within that is 50% of them kind of unsaturated. So be careful. Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. That's good information.
Thank you. Yeah.
Paula, I'm going to see if you're ready with some questions.
Yes, of course. Tom, thank you that you didn't share your screen because we don't understand anything when you share your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going with the first question. If you think, if you said the cow is using or eating byproducts which are not edible for humans, and if we feed them amino acids, aren't we going in the opposite way?
No. Well, how many human foods are formulated with synthetic amino acids in them? I can't really think of any standard foods. There'd be some supplements that might have some extra lysine in them. I can't think of any off the top of my head, Paula. And then when we think of yeah, no, I'm really struggling with trying to come up with an example of where that would be a direct competition. I can't come up with one. But even if we did, we would be talking, oh hell, you know, my current diets would have less than let's see, 0.08 divided by 60 times 100. Yeah, I'd be about 0.1% of the diet would be amino acids. And we put that in perspective against some of the human food byproducts that I feed. I'm using a bakery candy cookie blend that would represent, well, right now it's about 10% of the diet. And if we weren't feeding that to cows, it would go into landfills. So on a grand scale of thing, you know, any of these small inclusion specialty nutrients that we would feed that could potentially go direct to human are really so minor compared to the vast majority of human inedible feedstuffs that we use to feed cows.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Paula, I'm gonna butt in with a question before you go on with more. Tom, this past week or 10 days, Lynn and I have been talking back and forth, and I'm asking this because I'm glad to see Lottie has joined us. We were trying to look at, she was asking some questions about RUP and RDP, and often that, along with NEM, NEL, are used as rough analyses and rough guesstimations of the quality of a feed. In the model, they're tabular values, and we tend to tell people that, no, we look at MP and ME. What do you recommend that people do to do that sort of rough and ready analysis of a feed before they put it through the model?
Well, from again, primarily we are so concerned about how much fermentable carbohydrates and just total energy, because all of our animals are energy limited. So as a real quick and dirty number to look at on a forage analysis, I use this is going to sound kind of odd, so we're going back to an old style number, especially if the forage analysis has the level 1 TDN, which is from the 2001 dairy NRC, or even, no, they're not doing TDN in NASEM anymore. That kind of bites. But that level 1 TDN, which is calculated, it's based on work that Bill Weiss had done for years. The correlation between that TDN and what the ME or MP allowable production through the model is really high. That's actually a really good number to do a quick evaluation on. The protein side is a lot harder, and it really comes back to if we're looking for things that are going to provide rumen ammonia, well, basically everything's going to. It's really, to me anymore, it's a question of evaluating different bypass proteins where the question really, you know, what's their quality, their digestibility, their consistency, etc. Everything else, you know, it's meeting rumen ammonia requirements is typically pretty easy. So I really struggle with how to answer how have a quick and dirty number to look at on a feed analysis that would give an indication of where that would be. If I had to pull one quick out of the air, I would probably say total soluble protein, because that's going to be primarily rumen degraded, but it's not going to capture all the potential degradable nitrogen coming in from a feed. So it's really difficult. I have not come up with an adequate answer to the protein side. Energy is easy, TDN.
All right. Well, thank you, and I hope that helped Lottie in some of the questions she had in the past week. Paula or any of my co-hosts, can any of you have any questions that you want to re-explore?
I have
Very
3 or
good.
4.
Go.
Of course. Okay. The second question is if we have to consider a special protein formulation for fresh cows, considering they have they regulate their dry matter intake with the fermentability of the starch.
Oh, wow. All right. So that goes into the entire hot theory that Mike Allen proposed several years ago, and how high levels of fermentable starch with all the propionate production limits dry matter intake, especially in the fresh cow. And the data on that is really mixed. Even Mike's data itself sometimes showed that occurred. Other times didn't. They weren't able to invoke it. The data, let's see, Minor Institute did a couple trials where they were able to show that happening. Tom Overton's group at Cornell did a couple trials, and they were not able to show the impact. And the best I can say is when the Minor and Cornell data was combined, it's not really an overproduction of propionate per se, but rather the relative difference in fermentable starch between the close-up diet and the fresh diet, where if that starts getting too wide, more than 5 points difference in fermentable starch, then the risk of reduced intakes in the fresh cow goes up tremendously. And so it's really comes back to the prepartum and the fresh cow diet formulations, and we can minimize that risk tremendously, and then not have to worry about trying to push extra MP into the diet. And we also know if we did that, we would actually see body condition score drops much quicker, and in the long run, it's not very successful. So it's really don't worry about pushing additional MP into those fresh cows as much as ensuring that the transition and the difference in fermentable starch between close-up and fresh is less than 5 units apart, and you will see intakes and fresh cow performance improve really nicely. It's a really, after I saw that data, I looked at my diets and I was like 6 units difference, and I moved them to 4.5 or so units difference, and I definitely saw an increase in the slope of fresh cows in terms of milk production. So it is, and it's probably not so much. It's probably more related to rumen adaptation, going from a lower starch to a higher starch type of diet. So if we give that cow more time in the pre-fresh period to acclimate to a higher starch, that everything actually works better.
Okay, great explanation. Okay, may I go on with the next question, Maria?
Yes, Paula, and then I've got a question that I'll come back to after your next question.
Okay. The third question is, do we have to think also in the rearing diets to diminish the environmental impact? Where do we have to focus in these cases?
In lactating?
No, in the rearing heifers.
Oh, in heifers. Oh, wow. In heifers. Well, it's going to be, that's a great question, Paula. It's going to be that excessive feeding of degradable protein again is we're going to have more urinary nitrogen excretion, and that can also be a greater expense. I was just putting together some diets and looking at using a bypass soy versus solvent soy or canola meal in heifers, and I was having to feed a lot more of the canola or the soy to get the same amount of MP allowable gain. And I think that it goes two ways with that. One is we want to maximize the growth of those animals, because it's, again, if we think about it in terms of productive nitrogen, so in that case it would be body gain in relation to total nitrogen or urinary nitrogen or total nitrogen intake. The higher the gains we have, the more efficient that animal will be. And then watching how much total degradable nitrogen we have in those diets, and minimizing that so that we can reduce nitrogen excretion.
Tom, would that also come around to focusing some on genetics and making sure you're raising as few heifers as possible with the highest potential and then doing it well?
Well, that's always a great concept. It's ties back so much to, is the farm in a growth mode or in a what are the goals and objectives of the farm? Are they, can they market excess heifers, which chances are they won't break even on raising heifers doing that, but it's cash flow, and that's what a lot of people look at with doing that. It's because if they're in growth mode, if they're going to go from 1,000 to 1,500 cows over the next couple of years, or how successful is your calf program? I mean, there's so many things that go along with that, Marianne. In a perfect world, yes, we would know the genetic potential of those animals, and those with the poor genetic potential would be called at as early as possible, or they were bred to beef semen, using beef semen. Yeah, and we're slowly seeing more and more of that. But there's a lot there that has to work right from a farm management standpoint for that to be successful.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the one of the first year's talks that we did, Noella Silva del Rio, and her analysis in California of just the many and multitude of places that a well-formulated diet can be not received or fed to the cows. And at the time, I found it really discouraging. We'd had several similar webinars since, but yeah, it comes down. You had a slide about that
Oh, let's not even talk about how
management.
a bad feeder can screw you.
Yes. Paula, before I turn back to you, I'm going to follow up from Lottie Kingsmill. She has a question. Would you balance beef cow and backgrounders in similar percentages of nitrogen utilization and efficiency as a lactating cow?
Those growing animals will never have the same level of nitrogen efficiency. And unfortunately, at this point, I don't think we have enough numbers to really even come up with an idea of what is possible. So it's an area that needs more attention for sure.
Okay.
So I'm not even going to try and guess on a number, Lottie, because
Yeah.
I'd have to sit and play with a bunch of different formulations and try and come up with, what kind of estimate that we could be potentially looking at. But wow, yeah, I hesitate to even throw a number out at this point.
Mhm. All right. Thank you for taking a stab. And Lottie, thank you for your question. Paula, are you ready with some more questions from Argentina?
Yes, ready.
All right, shoot.
Okay, this is a question from Ariel. In the herd D, you showed us a diet with a feed efficiency of 1.99 milk divided by dry matter intake. They ate 59 pounds of dry matter and produced 120 pounds of milk. Those cows, were those cows losing weight? Because the report showed a positive balance. Is that possible? The diet had 1.77 mare cows.
It is okay. So that would be the high group of cows on that farm. Okay, that it's data that came from Larry Chase and Mike Van Amberg. So I think I know the herd that was, and I can assure you that yes, those cows were doing that, and their body condition score change would have been very small through that production period. It all comes back to really good forages, really high levels of intake. And let me throw this out at you. Here's we can, all the numbers that been able to pull together, it's kind of, I want you to think this way, that cows have the genetic, they're probably, I could call it their genetic potential, but I won't. I'll just say their production potential is, it looks like somewhere between 12 and 13% of body weight in terms of energy corrected milk. Okay. Now, not many herds, you won't see many herds you won't see fine herds doing that. You'll find groups of cows that can do that. I was talking with one of our clients in Western Canada about a Jersey herd that the entire herd was averaging over 9% of body weight. So the question becomes, if we are not seeing those numbers, if we're not seeing the high cows, peak cows being, 9, 10, 11% of body weight, the question becomes why? And that is first and foremost a forage quality issue, an intake issue, can be a housing issue, and it can be a management issue. But day in, day out, there are herds doing, herds averaging 50 plus kilos of milk. Forage quality and good management.
Great. And following that question, how does the nitrogen excess affect the cows with negative energy balance?
It'll push them into a little bit more negative energy balance. So there is an energetic cost for excreting excess nitrogen because of what the kidney has to do. And within the program, that's what we call the urea cost. And that gets added directly to the maintenance energy requirement. That can range anywhere from less than 1/10 of an mcal of Me to greater than 2 mcals, 2.5 mcals, especially if it's a pasture-based system with no additional grain being supplemented. So it definitely has some negative impact. And well, we can come back and say, if we're looking at groups with MUNs of 14, 15, definitely utilizing excess energy to get rid of that nitrogen.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome, Paula.
Okay. Paula, are you all set?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. All right. I have a question from Weeben, and he says, except maximizing rumen microbial production, what other tricks can we play to maintain high production if the price of soybean meal and canola meal are relatively too high?
Relatively too high to what?
Maybe he'll chat. Maybe just high.
Yeah. I mean, but again, where are we in terms of that marginal response curve? And really, as we look at the relative cost difference between soybean meal and bypass soy products, well, that price differential really hasn't widened. So it's actually on a cost per gram of MP, it's gotten cheaper and cheaper actually to use to bypass products. So it's really the way this is the way I approach it, is what is the lowest cost per gram of MP? And that could mean that we look at different processing ways with starch products. It could be using more bypass products. As long as we're meeting the nitrogen requirements of the bugs, then supplement the cow and minimize the excesses. There may be opportunities for some. We're seeing some new additives and such from some sources that may help with some things, but we've really got to be critical, do a critical evaluation of the data that they provide to see if it's going to be economically viable to use.
All right. Tom, unless I get buy-in from anybody else, I think we have covered all the questions. We did have a comment. More than a question is thank you, and it was great to have the discussions always. Tom, thanks for taking the time and being with us, and Hudai, Marty, Paula, and Sean, thanks for joining.
Marty, no more flying for you.
I saw, my goodness.
Sean, see you next week. Hudai, enjoy Australia.
Yeah, thank you.
Unfortunate that we won't catch up with you next month, but I would be with you and go to Australia, especially in the spring. Yeah, that'll be nice.
Ah.
Yes, spring.
All right, I have a quick one. Any comments on high protein DDG?
Oh, I evaluate those the same way as anything else, cost per gram of MP. And then where will I end up on lysine balances as well? Because being a corn protein, it's going to be low in lysine. And then how consistent is the product in terms of being a high protein? Some of them are really good. That's for sure. But again, look at them in terms of cost per gram of MP and cost per gram of MP lysine, and make your decisions based on that.
All right. Unless we get another one real quick, I'm going to say thank you to everyone. It's been a good season, and hopefully next year will be wonderful too. Thank you for attending, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye.
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 And we got to
Bye-bye.
figure out how to get to Argentina in the next year so we can do some shit live. Bye, everyone.
Ooh, Paula's going to visit.
Paula's going to visit?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to the US and you come here.
She's going to come up before ADSA.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can't we'll talk. Okay.
All right.
Yes, we'll talk. Thank you. Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.